Welcome to The Founder's Mind. On this episode, I have Haley Hoffman Smith. She is the Director of Community for Next Gen Summit and the founder of Her Big Idea Fund. In partnership with Brown University, they award grants to women of all ages and backgrounds. In parallel to the fund, Haley published a book available on Amazon called Her Big Idea, diving into the gap in funding for women and how to get more women following their entrepreneurial aspirations. Listen in and learn what Haley has learned along the way and where she's hoping to nudge the future of entrepreneurship through her work. Haley, thank you for being on The Founder's Mind. I'm very excited
to be here.
Excellent.
Thank you.
I've got your book here, Her Big Idea, which is awesome. And
Yay.
I'm excited to get into some of the things that you're up to. I'd love to hear from your perspective and your voice. You know, what are you doing? What are you up to? What are you working on? It seems like a lot.
Yeah, it definitely is a lot. But the exciting thing about it is that everything is very interconnected and collaborative. So my full-time job is the Director of Community for Next Gen Summit. So I just graduated from Brown at the end of May.
Congratulations.
So I launched into full-time work. Thank you so much. And I had worked for Next Gen previously. I've always been really passionate about what we're doing there. So we're empowering a community of 2,500 young entrepreneurs, giving them all the resources that they need to succeed and being there for them on a very personal level. And this work is incredibly inspiring to me because Her Big Idea, my book, is all about empowering female founders. So might as well empower both. Getting more female founders into the fold.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm in complete agreement.
Awesome. And so alongside the book, I launched a fund called the Her Big Idea Fund in partnership with Brown University's Nelson Center for Entrepreneurship. And the idea is that half of the proceeds from the book go to the fund, and then women can apply to the fund with their big ideas as according to the book's innovation stipulations to receive grants. So it's supposed to mitigate risk-taking, encourage bigger thinking without the concern about money. So I'm really excited about that. I've been getting that up and going ever since the book came out, depositing money in there, and then also thinking of ways that we can raise money on a larger scale so we can really help businesses that apply have grants that can, have a lot of money to help them scale or whatever else they need to do.
Yeah. I'm always curious, what got you into this space? I mean, you just graduated college, like you said. What was sort of the entry point into entrepreneurship and the work that you're doing now?
So my first company was a nonprofit. I started it when I was 18 years old, called Lit Without Limits. And I was donating books to girls around the world in mentoring groups. And I'd write a curriculum to go along with these books. And we spread to Pakistan, the Philippines, all over the place, which was really exciting. And it was my first experimentation with entrepreneurship, which I didn't know it to be entrepreneurship at the time. But I was hooked. I was so excited that you could start a mission, add branding to it to get out into the world and make a difference. And the chief financial officer of Best Nonprofit approached me about starting a for-profit company, considering I had grown quite a following and a movement called She Is Without Limits. So we got that off the ground. We had a blog. We had several lines of apparel using the She Is tagline. So one said, "She is changing the game." One said, "She is hitting the books." And it was a really exciting time. I loved creating everything and being always in that creative space and knowing that what I was putting out there was something I believed in. And unfortunately, things didn't work out with a co-founder, which I talk about in my book. It's exactly how my book starts out if you've opened the first page. I saw firsthand how difficult it can be to have a vision for something, but to need the financial means from an investor, another person. Basically, She told me whoever has the money calls the shots. She wasn't really pulling her own weight. I felt like an intern in my own company. And that's really one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about the fund. But I wrote the book, Her Big Idea, because after the company dissolved and everything fell apart, I was having a really hard time with my personal identity because my identity had been so tied up with the idea and the company. And basically the book is saying, like, an idea is always worth pursuing no matter how it turns out. And we can have a separation of our identities from our ideas so we can be more playful with them. And we have to understand that the pursuit of an idea doesn't mean that it's something that we do forever or that we have a successful exit with. Regardless, if we pursue an idea, we're going to learn something more about ourselves. We're going to put something great out into the world. We'll learn more about business. We can do it better the next time, but really urging, if you have an idea, pursue it and, stop being so attached to the end goal and stop attaching it to your identity.
You bring up two really, really awesome points that come up in conversations, at least with, my coaching work and just people that I meet, which is, what is your relationship to the work that you do from an identity standpoint, which you just mentioned. And I think it is really important to have that space, like you said. But we don't spend a lot of time talking about it. So I'm sure people will be excited to get into that in what you've written. And then the other point is this sort of flexibility, and things don't have to go on forever. I had this conversation with a guy in DC who does some consulting, and he was talking about how when companies are started, there's sort of this idea that they should exist forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
When sometimes there's sort of a finite timeline for how something is, like how functional something is. And we don't think about that a lot, which is interesting as well. So I'm glad you brought those up.
And it's like the industry you created in, that's always changing. There's always going to be a new industry disruptor. So either you can spend the entire lifeline of your business trying to beat out the competitors and ride the waves of the industry, or you can, let your idea be your idea and ride that way for as long as it lasts. But I think in general, humans have this, it's hard for us to let go. When we're dating someone and we really love them, we're like, we are definitely getting married. And when you meet a best friend and you love them, you're like, we are best friends forever. And when you move to a new place and you love it, you're like, I'm living here forever. Like, you can't appreciate things for the temporary or as long as this lasts. And that makes it hard to see things objectively. So I thought I'd, be working on Choose Without Limits forever. And so because of that, I, didn't really speak up when things got rocky with my co-founder. And that was the ultimate mistake. I was like, no, everything will turn out fine. I am doing this forever. But if I saw it as something like, this could end at any time, and I had that disattachment from it, then it would have been easier to stand up for myself. And, maybe the company would still be running today, if so.
Yeah, I think that's always, it's, hindsight is 20/20, right? So we can always sort of project backwards what could have happened.
Definitely, which is a rabbit hole. We're always like, we could have, you never know how things could have turned out. We just know what we do from how it did turn out, and can apply that for next time.
I would assume you can easily argue that had it not been rocky and challenging, you might not have a book.
That's true. That's absolutely true. And I'm way more proud of this book than I am of that company. So we're on the up and up.
Exactly. So that was the gift. Mm-hmm. I feel like you've already kind of talked about, a challenge that you've experienced with a co-founder, but I'm wondering if you could maybe elaborate a little bit more. How did you navigate that? What were sort of the things that came up that helped you move through it?
So, So as I said at the beginning, at first I had a really hard time speaking my mind. I'm not a very confrontational person, and that's been hard in business for me to, say things how they are. Mm-hmm. So she basically was the one that instigated most of the conflict in terms of, sending me like a really rude email, which the email I quote in the book, like the first line was, "I think you're screwing me over," which is hilarious because she was screwing me over.
Right.
But I felt really alone through this time because at least like in my groups of friends, like nobody had been through this before. Like, at the time I was only 21 years old. And so I leaned a lot on the Entrepreneurship Center at Brown, talked with mentors, talked with some attorneys who were willing to give me their time, which was amazing. Got a few of them to look over the operating agreement. So at least I got my bearings a little bit. Mm-hmm. I was treading this territory I had no idea about. Like, I thought for a limited liability corporation that you could be held liable for, because she was saying I owed her all this money and I didn't know that I was protected. And, I could have given it over if I didn't have the support systems in place to be like, well, what type of company did you incorporate as? And what does your operating agreement look like? So, I just feel really grateful to the advisors, mentors, and attorneys who helped me navigate the process, to have the right language, to know when to reply to an email and when not to, and to protect myself. And throughout this whole process and realizing how much I didn't know, that I thought I knew, or at least thought I knew how to navigate, I started an incubator at Brown for female founders called the We at Brown Incubator, Women's Entrepreneurship at Brown Incubator. And the number one part of the curriculum that I knew I needed over and above like branding or putting together a team, was to have an attorney come in and talk about different ways to incorporate and knowing your rights, knowing how to protect yourself. And this is really dry material. Like when someone's up there talking about that and you're not really at the stage yet when you're incorporating, and you're just getting the information, like it's kind of a bore. You're like falling asleep during the meeting, but it's so critically important. And that's what I really drive. So I made sure to talk with the girls each time and say, like, listen, the reason that I brought in this attorney is because like, this is what happened to me and this is what you have to look out for, and, you know, equip yourself with the knowledge beforehand.
That's really, I'm just listening, and I'm kind of, you can't see but I'm grinning because there's this theme in your story already about bringing in other perspectives and bringing in a community of people around you, or finding a community of people that have essentially been through the shit, right? And can help inform, you know, the early stage decisions that you find yourself making as a founder, whether it's a small company or a massive company that's growing very quickly.
Yeah, and that's critical because it's not an easy conversation. I took a class my last semester at Brown called Entrepreneurial Adversity, and it was the most real and honest class I've ever taken, because I mean, by then everyone had taken entrepreneurship classes and knew what it entailed, but to talk about periods of incredible strife and hardship during a company and how you navigate that, like that's what people need to know. Mm-hmm. And they need to be aware that things are going to be hard when they go into a company, because you so often see the success stories and people don't often talk about the obstacles that were in their way. And so they think they have a $1 million idea and everything's going to be smooth sailing. And I think if we teach people to anticipate the bumps in the road, you know, not like, it would basically like expect them because they're going to happen, and equip them with the tools to get through them, then entrepreneurship won't seem so scary and people will feel more courage in pursuing their ideas.
I think that's a great point. And also, and just as you were talking, the distinction between, you know, being a unicorn and being a solid business and failure, you know, there are really big deltas in between those categories. You know, like there aren't 20 LeBron James. There's one of them, you know, because, you know, of the talent and also the work that he put in. And it's the same with entrepreneurs. There aren't 20 Airbnbs.
Right.
You know, there's one of them, because the majority of companies fail. And entrepreneurship has it's having this really interesting moment where it's seen as very sexy and, you know, like this thing that will solve your financial problems.
And everybody is calling themselves an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Even if they haven't started a company. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I have my fair share of landing pages out there. But, you know, actually building a brand and a business and revenue, it takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
And people need to be reminded.
Yeah, that's for sure. So, I mean, something I'm really trying to drive home is helping the people who wouldn't consider starting a company but have an idea that's really nagging at them to go for it and start it. That's really what I'm trying to drive home with my book.
So what do you think with that idea, right? There's this sex appeal that I think is a little misleading, right? And then there's the reality, which is not bad. It just takes a lot of work. Like anything good takes a lot of work. And this, you know, this idea from your book and sort of the work that you're doing, which is, you know, making it more attainable and saying, pursue that idea.
Yeah, I think there's two types of people. You know, one is the person who they aren't really creating anything, but they're calling themselves an entrepreneur, and that really kind of does the rest of us a bad rep. And then the person who, you know, they are an entrepreneur true by trade, so they have an idea that they're pursuing. But I'm like trying to appeal to the person who has an idea, but they don't see the value in themselves, or they don't feel the confidence in themselves to go ahead and bring it to life, even though they think about it all the time. So I got a message earlier this week from a girl who had just finished reading my book, and she said that she has had a dream her entire life to open her own restaurant. Mm-hmm. And she'd even gone and gotten a restaurant management degree, but so many people had told her, you know, startups fail, this is way too risky. And so she kind of lost sight of that passion. And she was like, you know, I don't think I can do this. Yeah. And she said, my book really reignited that passion in activism in her to go ahead and start it. And that's what I'm going for, you know, like say, yeah, it's going to be tricky and it's going to be hard, but your ideas are worth pursuing. I also say in my book that it doesn't necessarily have to be a company. It can be a book of your own, or a song, or an album. So I'm trying to give autonomy to people who have ideas regardless of what they are, to say like, I'm worthy of bringing this to life. And because I had the idea, it's mine to bring to life. Like, even if I think someone else would be better equipped with different talents and capacities to bring it to life, like, no, this is my idea. And I deserve like the great adventure of bringing this to life.
Yeah. Actualizing it.
Mm-hmm.
Ben Horowitz is famously quoted as saying, when he was the CEO of a company, he slept like a baby. He woke up every 2 hours and cried. And not that it's always that extreme, but I'm wondering if there's anything, in all the work that you're doing and sort of the different initiatives that you're pushing forward, is there anything that's got you up at night, keeping you up and gnawing at you? Yeah.
So my entire book was, aside from my own personal company failure, it was motivated by the funding gap. So only 2% of venture capital spending went to women last year. And I know that I'm, trying to make a change in that by bringing awareness to the situation and, having a fund where I'm giving money to women. But I still feel really lost on how to point women in the right direction if they need investment, and helping them navigate. I mean, pitching to like male venture capitalists to raise the big money as opposed to the seed money that typically like smaller female investors have. These are really tricky questions, and there's a lot of people trying to figure it out alongside me. But yeah, I don't really have an answer there. And that, it's really bothersome because I want to be able to tell people like, yeah, you have this idea and you put down all the groundwork, you got the advisors, you have the business plan, and now you just need to raise money. Like, I have no idea where to tell you to go. And that's discouraging.
Yeah, it's a massive wall to climb. So it could be Next Gen, could be the fund you have with Brown, but what's one of the next big milestones that you're looking at and working towards?
Ooh, there's so much. Let's see. I'm just really excited about Next Gen. It is such an amazing company and an amazing community. I feel really fulfilled every day working for them. And I know that we have some things coming down the pipe that are for women that I am leading and curating, which I'm really excited about. So I'll release more on that as it comes, but obviously excited about the fund as well. Like, my long-term goal is to have an investment fund for women. So it's not just giving them grants, but investing in their ideas and having really high-profile investors on there, so we can give them the big money, the millions and millions of dollars in funding that they need and deserve to scale their companies. So always working on that in the background. I think it's good to have long-term goals. I knew somebody who would make really short-term goals. So she'd be like, by next month, X, and it would be a very big, audacious goal, like something we would say 5 years from now, which is exciting because then you start working towards it ahead of time. But in my short 22 years, I've noticed that, like, at least affixing yourself on a long-term goal, and that seems pretty impossible, but taking the steps necessary to get there with smaller short-term goals and smaller accomplishments is pretty key, because I know I have a lot to learn and a lot more to experience before I tackle that big goal, because you only have like one chance to start something like that, and I want to make sure the timing's right and I am as prepared as I can be.
Yeah, putting in the work and sort of having your eye on the prize, as people say.
Exactly. Always.
We already talked a little bit about advice and some of the experience that you had, especially being in that founder role. But is there a piece of advice that you've received as a founder that you found particularly helpful?
Yeah. So the first of which is, it's kind of like a two-pronged piece of advice, but it's the question, does your idea solve a problem? So She Is Without Limits. I thought everyone will love to buy these shirts because they're cute and empowering. Someone will want to get them for a friend, but it didn't solve a problem. And so I don't think the company would have turned out as successfully as I initially thought. But second of all, considering, okay, yeah, maybe you say your company solves a problem, but does it solve a problem that's impacting a lot of people? One of my mentors from Brown, Deb Mills-Schofield, was very influential in my life. And she said that a lot of the time, the people who are thinking about solutions, our problems are really different from the people who would be buying our product.
Yeah.
So critical to do market research, understand the depth of the problem, and always be challenging our assumptions.
Yeah.
So once you have an idea, that's great, but you have to go out and validate it. And that's part of the innovation stipulations from my book and my fund. It's the I, intelligent. You got to go out and do that market research.
That's a piece of advice that's come up several times on this show, which is like you said, is doing the research, essentially making your future customers a part of the development process.
Yes.
Because it will make a difference.
No, it definitely will. Why else? You can't create something and then put it out in the market and just like expect people to see how it solves their problem if you don't fully understand their behaviors and their, unique issues that they're trying to solve.
I think, on the totally flip side, there's, Steve Jobs is famously quoted with saying, if I asked people if they wanted the iPod, they would have said they just wanted another Discman or something like that. They wouldn't have known what to say. But I think that that's a very, very, very small and unlikely scenario for most founders, especially when you're starting from zero. It's, including your customers in that conversation.
Because even then, you probably wouldn't show them the product and be like, what would you think of this? But you'd rather understand, like, what are the problems that annoy you with your current disc cassette or whatever they called it?
Exactly.
Like, if it could do anything, what would you wish it could do?
Yeah.
And just understanding the way that they work with the product on a daily basis. So getting in and observing. I thought it was really cool that Apple found that people don't necessarily want to buy a whole CD and have every single song on the CD. And so, they enabled people to go out and buy just one song off of iTunes.
Yeah, I mean,
and
it changed everything.
Was partly from,
at least in the music
world.
And
that was partly from observing. And I'm sure one person was like, oh, it's so annoying. I don't like any of the other songs in this album except for this one, but I had to pay $20 to buy the CD. Picking up on little things like that,
Yeah, listening
little
closely.
Complaints.
There's in the coaching work that I do, one of the things that we talk about is in every complaint, there is a request.
Ooh,
so when
I like
someone,
that.
especially like if a colleague is really in your ear, or even a co-founder, if someone's really complaining about something, usually somewhere in there's a request that they have that they're unable to articulate or don't feel comfortable articulating.
No, that's a really good point. I love that.
Who's a founder you admire and why?
Jennifer Hyman, founder of Rent the Runway. I've already mentioned Rent the Runway just in this podcast, but in my book, oh my gosh, like every other chapter. She is just like the holy grail of female entrepreneurship. I love Rent the Runway, first of all. I'm an unlimited member. And I just could not have more respect for their brand, their company, and just the fact that, talk about a big idea, because they have to hold so much inventory. They have to have the same dress, the same shirt, and every different size. And they had to take on this huge investment and this huge undertaking before they even knew if it would sell. But they did the market research thing too. So basically they took some of these designer dresses to Harvard, and they asked undergraduate female students to try them on. And they saw this girl who twirled in front of the mirror in the dress, and she goes, "I feel hot." And they knew right then that was the magic, helping women feel confident and love what they're wearing. And as they're saying now, have a closet in the cloud. And that is a really unique problem for women that I don't know who else would have, been able to solve that or come up with that idea, because I don't know, personally, I always hate what I wear after I've already worn it once. So it's better to rent. And they've really just tapped into a perfect area of the market and have done a phenomenal job with it. And it's one of those companies that if it went out of business, it would severely hinder my life.
That's always an interesting measure of a brand or a company, right? What is the impact if it were to disappear?
I'd be devastated. What about you? Is there a company that if it disappeared, you would be
Oh my goodness.
upset?
That's a good question. Flipping the script here.
I know.
I think that there are a lot of companies. Some are new and some are old. I worked at Apple for 7 years, so I have a very entrenched connection to the technology and how they develop their software and the experience. Obviously, they're the biggest company in the world at this point, but when you create something where you can forget that you're actually using a piece of technology. So when I use my laptop or my phone, I'm not reminded constantly that I'm using those devices. I get to just interact with the information and the experience, right? And I think if that disappeared, I would be even more frustrated with the technological situation in the world. So.
Yeah. I think a lot of people would back you up on that. I would agree.
Yeah. And I think a newer one, I love Airbnb. I love being able to be in a neighborhood. I love walking around cities and feeling like a local. And I think that would disrupt my travel experience in a pretty big way. I really like just finding like that spot. I always go on like Bon Appetit or Thrillist or Eater, and I look for like the hottest neighborhoods for to go out and eat. And then when I look for Airbnbs, I just pick Airbnbs in those neighborhoods.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
You have like a whole system around it.
Oh yeah. No, yeah. So that would be very disruptive to my life.
Oh man. Well, if that
good.
were to ever happen, I recommend Hotel Tonight for an more cheap option. But
yeah, that's an app, right?
I've seen it on. I actually just started looking into it, but I don't think it's just an app. I'm sure. Okay. I'm sure they have an app, but yeah.
For sure. What's something you learned recently that blew your mind?
Oh, actually, they just came out with that article about how 40% of venture capitalists come from Harvard and Stanford. And that blew my mind because what? Like, there's so many incredible schools that maybe aren't like the top two, like Harvard and Stanford, but like all of the Ivy Leagues, all of the tech schools. And I think like maybe it didn't completely blow my mind because partly I understand that in venture capital, people typically hire those they see themselves in. So if it's like the boys club, they're hiring men they see themselves in. But I was like, seriously? I think that's kind of absurd. That just really drives home how the lack of diversity in venture capital, and that you really have to be like the top 1% of the world in terms of like, not even necessarily your intelligence, but like having everything that someone could see and be like, oh yes, you'll be successful, like being a man and being a white male. And I was very frustrated by that.
Being a straight white male is a very strong brand in the business world. It's very well insulated.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really good point, though. The 40% come from two universities. Steve Case, founder of AOL, is on a mission to invest heavily in areas outside of the traditional investment zones. Like, I think it's 75% of investments go to 3 states, and actually 50% go to California. So 25% of the remaining investments go to the remaining states in the U.S., which is insane. And for me, there's a strong connection in that stat and the stat that you just shared, which is 40% of the people that are making investments have come from the same sort of, academic background, very probably, and not, I don't want to paint too broad a brushstroke, but on average, similar environments. And we kind of need to blow it up a little bit. If we want to innovate for a future that is taking into account a very quickly changing reality, whether it's environmental, whether it's social, whether it's economic, things are changing quickly, and it's not going to be the same as it has been the last 100 years.
I agree. And I'm excited that articles like this are coming out that are kind of calling the situation out so other people can be just as mind-boggled as I was and start to push for change.
Yeah, I have one other question that I like to ask, which is, how can people find you online, follow along in your work? I know you're building communities and you're trying to get communities funded, so I'm sure people are going to want to reach out to you. So what's the best way to follow along in your journey and what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm an active Instagram user. So my Instagram handle is Haley Hoffman Smith, just my name, Haley. And I would say that's probably the best guess. On there, I have a link to the Her Big Idea website. It also links to the NextGen Facebook page. Instagram page, so they could follow along with NextGen. And if anybody's interested in getting involved in the NextGen community, I would love to talk with you. And also, I'm going to plug my book again. So my book's on Amazon. It's called Her Big Idea. As I said, half the proceeds for the book go to the fund. And the book is an awesome read, if I do say so myself. So definitely trying to get that in the hands of as many people as possible.
That's awesome, and I can attest that it is a great read, and I love that half the proceeds are going to this fund. And I think that's a big part of this is putting your money where your mouth is, and also we have to do things differently. And that is in fact different. It's putting money in a fund to put money in companies that are trying to change the game.
Yeah. So I think that to that end, the last question I would pose is, if there is something that keeps you up at night and there's something that you think you're passionate about, and you probably are passionate about, like, what are you going to do about it? And that doesn't mean you have to start a company to combat it, but just as you said, putting money where your mouth is, go out in the world and try to make an impact in it however you can, even if it's what you think is a small impact at first.
I love it. I'm just going to say thank you for being on the show and leave it at that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Founder's Mind. Check back next week to hear from John Zeratsky, New York Times bestselling author of the book Sprint, and most recently author of Make Time. Tune in to the next episode to learn all about what John has learned on how to make time in your daily life. To make sure you don't miss any awesome wisdom from guests and stay up to date on the most recent episodes of the show, be sure to visit thefoundersmind.com. You can also follow along on social at The Founder's Mind. And last but not least, thank you to Roy Matz for the music on this show and his dope editing skills that make The Founder's Mind possible. Until next time, take care.
In the world, going through all of this insanity, and try to bring new ideas, make them a reality. Illuminate in the thoughts, make it a priority to implement what you learn. What you get is what you be. In a world full of noise, hard to find that clarity to try to lead subtly, never full of vanity, and try to change something small or try to change humanity. Power forward through the dark, founder's mind is what you see. Founder's mind is what you see.